Welcome back to the Shine Within podcast. Allison Guilbault is a licensed therapist, international speaker, and mindset and transformation coach who specializes in the interplay between alcohol, anxiety, and mental health. Starting her career as a crisis counselor in an emergency room, Allison has extensive experience in handling challenging mental health situations. She is the founder of Mindful Mental Health, an innovative online practice dedicated to helping individuals overcome shame and limiting beliefs to achieve profound transformation. Known for her resilience and empowerment-driven approach, Allison guides her clients to reclaim confidence and rediscover their highest purpose, promoting lasting change in their lives. I love that, Allison. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being on my show today. I'm
Oh,
excited to talk to you because
yeah.
we were just, before we hit record, we were just talking about our alcohol-free journey and how much we feel so much better, right?
My
I
God,
mean,
yes.
yeah, so much better. But if you can go ahead and start by sharing your journey, your personal journey, and towards becoming alcohol free, and how it actually influenced your professional focus on mental health and transformation.
Yeah. So, I think probably it started a little bit during COVID, right? So when COVID hit, I was a New York City bartender at that point, I think for over 18 years. And I was also a therapist. So when the city shut down, I lost my bartending job, but then my therapy job, as one can probably imagine, kind of kicked into high gear. And something I noticed during COVID that I know a lot of my clients struggled with is sort of what to do with myself, right? Like the world shut down and I had this like very pervasive habit of work, 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 and then hit the bars on the weekends. And I didn't really know what to do with myself. And it was a huge revelation of just kind of reflection of how much time I was actually giving to almost the identity that I had as like a bartender, a party girl, a drinker, right? I had like very work hard, play harder mentality. I was super successful in my career and things like that. But I think my fulfillment was really quite superficial. And when the world sort of fell away, I remember often speaking to clients and saying, like, this would be a missed lesson if we just hit the ground running at exactly where we were when it fell away. And so I really started looking at my relationship with alcohol like during that pause. And I wish this story was like, and then I didn't drink and I was just sitting in sobriety during COVID. But actually my drinking kind of took a upswing, right? And I had historically been a social drinker, right? I loved going out. I loved being with people. I was like always the like uno mas, state of the bar closing, like the last person out the door. And I didn't really drink at home by myself. And during COVID, both my husband and I really almost like increased our drinking because we had like nothing to freaking do. And so I would finish work, 6, 7 o'clock. I was doing virtual therapy. And then like we'd make martinis. And I felt super gross. Like just when the world reopened, I remember one of the first times I went to the bar and like drinking way too much, and just pausing and hearing my own wisdom of like that whole, if we paused during the world shut down and didn't get some clarity on our life, this is the misstep. And I really started thinking, what am I doing with my life? Right? Like, is this really what fulfillment looks like? This like wash, rinse, repeat cycle of work, drink, work, drink, work, drink. So right when the bars reopened is exactly when I decided to take just a break from booze, right? I didn't commit to sobriety. I was like, maybe I'll just start drinking non-alcoholic beer. Maybe I'll just see what it feels like to play with and kind of have some experience socially without alcohol. And I did it for about a month. And I have to say, I felt better, right? Like my anxiety started to decrease. My room, one of the big things that would happen to me as a person who was hungover is I wouldn't get the like stereotypical hangover symptoms. I wouldn't throw up. I wouldn't like couldn't get out of bed. Like I could go to work. I could function as a person. But at night, I would wake up at like 3, 4 in the morning with just horrible shame, right? And I would like check my phone and I make sure that I wasn't like texting anybody wrong. And I never actually did anything that was really that cringy, but my mind was constantly playing tricks on me and I would just live in this shame spiral. And I noticed when I gave up the alcohol for the 30 days, that started to go away. I wasn't waking up with the same panic. Um, and so I played with it back and forth, right? I went 30 days and then I was like, that was nice detox. And I'd go back to drinking again. And that happened over the course of, I would say, like almost 2 years, right? Like playing with not drinking, drinking, not drinking, drinking. Um, and then the piece that kind of really started my journey was somewhat coincidental and random. I had always wanted to go to Bali. It had been a life goal of mine. I've just really drawn to the culture, drawn to just everything about it. And I was searching for a retreat. I just wanted to go to a retreat in Bali. And I found this itinerary for a retreat that was stunning, right? It was like everything I wanted. It was like a water ceremony and a fire ceremony, and it was all women. But the caveat was it was for alcohol-free women. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, I have played with sobriety. I'm not like sober, sober though. Can I kind of fake it if I go? And what I ended up doing is in my past life, I used to be a private investigator about in my 20s. So I was really good at like researching on the internet. So I researched who the like men, like who's hosting this retreat. And she's an alcohol-free coach. And so I went onto her website and I decided to book a discovery call for her coaching program. But my agenda was not to book the discovery call or like not to join her program. It was really to see like how sober is this woman, right? Like, can I sneak away with like being sober curious? And I got on the phone with this coach. And by the end of the discovery call, I was in tears, right? I was hearing everything she was saying. And she was like, alcohol really disrupts our anxiety, it limits us. Like, you are capable of so many things. Imagine you had all that time back where you weren't drinking, and not only not drinking, but you weren't so concentrated on thinking about even drinking, right? All the rules you make for yourself. I only have two today. I only drink margaritas. I only wine on Tuesdays. If you took away all that energy and you focused it towards something else, anything else, like what would your life look like? And by the end of that call, I signed her up as my coach. And I really, really started doing like the work. So I'm proud to say I still did those kind of like breaks, but they became longer and longer with every break. So I went from 30 days to 50 days to 100 days. So, in certain, I think there was like a year or two, I allowed myself like 3 days of drinking through in the year. And I mean, no surprise here, right? I felt like crap those 3 days, right?
Oh,
And so my most recent on August 15th, I committed to a year. So I'm, probably like I think like 200 something days in now. But where I am now, I can't imagine that the year is that I'll go back to drinking at the year. This is just now. I've just adopted it as a life approach. And everything about my life has become better. I started my own business. I have my own podcast. I run a coaching group. My relationship with my husband is profoundly better. I travel the world, and I really attribute a lot of that to ditching booze. So,
wow.
yeah.
Now that's what I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen. Look what your life can be like when you just try it out, even if it's just for a week,
Yep,
and then
exactly.
those little baby steps will then start developing and then they'll become bigger steps. And then you're like, you know
Yes.
what? I don't even want this crap anymore because you're so content in your life that you don't even think about alcohol the way you used to anymore,
True.
you know? It's like for me, alcohol is just there for whoever wants it, not for me. Thank you. But
Yep.
by all means, if you want to go ahead, if you want to get help, then we're here to help you as well. So that's so awesome. And that's why I love coaches, is because they make a
Mm-hmm.
difference. Like for me, there was no sobriety, there was no recovery coach. When I got sober in 2017, I sought out a fitness mindset coach, and she also did yoga. Man, talk about limiting beliefs. Talk about, how I was shaming myself and that negative talk, that negative roommate in your head that's always talking down to you. Oh my goodness. I had to say peace out to you. Goodbye, friends that were making me feel bad about myself. And just started changing my life. And so I love that you brought up 2020, is because I think 2020 is like clear vision, where
Mm-hmm.
we did have that pause And we had to have an awakening to our spirit. Like, who are we? Why are we here? What are we doing? What is our purpose here on earth? Right. So, and
Yeah.
it's so neat that you're like taking that moment for yourself and you're getting clarity. Like for me, my clarity was like, wow, what is this world really about? Let me research everything that's going on here. Let me learn how to cook. let me learn the things that I want to go ahead and start doing, reading more books, and I just like wanted to learn information. Like I'm also a researcher myself. I wasn't an investigator, but I would say, I don't know if you know Enneagrams, but I'm a 7 and a 5, which is an investigator or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But those are fun to take, by the way. But
Totally.
but I noticed I did have a lot of anxiety, growing up. I had a lot of sexual trauma that I kept inside that I didn't share until like later on in my 20s. And even then, I still was drinking it all the way up until like in my 30s. I would love for you to actually go ahead and share the actual deep impact of alcohol on the brain. And I know
Yeah.
we know some of the obvious ones, but maybe you can go ahead and explain some of the less obvious ways that alcohol can go ahead and affect our mental processes and overall brain health.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So I always like to preface this with, so I have 4 degrees in mental health, right? So I have a lot of education on mental health and psychology, and I actually did not know this, right? So no one in any one of my programs ever taught it to me. And it was really when I was doing my own sober, curious journey that I really learned about brain health. So, and now I'm a brain health nerd. So one of the things that has helped me think about alcohol is, so alcohol, whether we like it or not, is an actual literal poison, right? So it's ethanol. And so which is the same component of gasoline. So when we drink alcohol, our body sees it as a poison because that's exactly what it is. And so, kind of the obvious ways that we understand that is like, people get sick after drinking because just like getting food poisoning, we're trying to expend, something that's toxic to our body. But what I did not know is the way that your brain starts to process alcohol when you're drinking is it wants to preserve your organs, right? It's like, what is happening? This terrible thing is inside of my body. I need to start to shut down things that are not critical in this moment. So the first thing that starts to go is your motor skills, right? Which is why we slur, it's why we trip. And then the second thing that starts to go is our emotional regulation, right? It's why people become angry drunks. It's why people cry, right? Like we all had that friends, maybe it's even yourself, of like, we just don't process feelings well when we're drinking. And then lastly, it starts to shut down your short-term memory, right? So there are literal spaces in your brain that I now envision like going dark, right? Like they go offline to preserve your body. And, when I say this to people, some people are just like, oh, yeah, that's what it is. For me, that was actually a terrifying thing. And I think now back to, when I was bartending, and my husband still owns the bars, right? He's a New York City bar owner. So they still exist. We have a wonderful mocktail and non-alcoholic cocktail list. If you would like mocktail list, if you'd like to come in and enjoy music and not drink, but it's open till 5 o'clock in the morning. Right. And I think back to what, like, what did it look like at 3:30 a.m.? And when I became sober, there was about maybe 9 months that I bartended completely sober with all of this kind of information in my brain and just looking around at the people, right? And no judgment because I know I was there myself, but it's like these people actually aren't living their best lives, right? And I can reflect back to my own drinking and thinking like, okay, I'm sitting with my drinking friends and I'm thinking we're having this like deep, meaningful conversation. These are my besties. And if I really, really am honest with myself, it's like we were repeating ourselves. No one's really listening, right? Like, how deep is a drunken conversation? You might not even remember the details. So that's something that I always like to share as like a big, I don't know, it was a big revelation to me. Just, like you're poisoning your literal brain. That's a big deal. And then the second thing that I think is really important that I didn't understand is just how your hormones fluctuate. So, what happens when we start to drink? We get a huge surge of what's called dopamine. And dopamine is typically seen as like our reward chemical in our brain, right? So it's almost like you're anticipating a treat. So you can get this if you're seeing your partner for the first time in a while, you're petting a dog, right? It's like anything that's really rewarding, we get this like flood of yay, feel good emotion. And because our culture is so conditioned to looking at alcohol as like the things we cheers for, the way we unwind, it's the way we socialize. We have a lot of programming that the moment that we're sitting down and ordering our first drink, pouring that first glass of wine, we get this flood of like, hooray. But what happens is we get so much dopamine, our body actually gets confused. It's like, doesn't make any sense. So it starts to flood in what we call cortisol, right? And that's our stress hormone. So I don't know if this happens to you. It absolutely used to happen to me. But the cortisol rushes in about 5 hours after your last drink, which is why it's so common for people to wake up in a shame spiral, right? So they go to sleep, they put in a few hours, but they're waking up and they're like, their heart's racing, they're feeling anxious. And that cortisol can continue to raise for up to 72 hours, right? And so, again, once I sort of learned that, it made me aware that it wasn't that I was just having a difficult time being a drinker, because I really thought that for a long time. Like, why does everybody else figure this out? And I'm the one who's always stressed out. I'm always one who feels so shameful. It's really just like, I can't, there's no mind over matter that's just what's going to happen when I drink, because that's just what my body is doing to sort of get back to homeostasis. So those are the two main things that I always like to share sort of about like the health implications, because I don't think we talk about alcohol so much in the framework of addiction, but we don't often talk about it in just like your basic mental health and wellness, right? Like, you are disrupting your own energy, you're disrupting your own stress levels, you're disrupting your own zen. And I think it's so almost like ironic and a bit sad, a lot sad, that a lot of the, particularly the women, but men too, um, that drink, it's like often they're doing so much for their wellness. They do yoga or they meditate or they, drink the kale smoothies. And then like we have all this culture that allows us to drink alcohol, and it's sort of like it's overriding all of the good stuff we're doing.
Oh
So
my
yeah.
gosh, yes. You totally bring up so many good points and a lot of memories too.
Mm.
I remember those times, in the bars at 3 in the morning and we'd be hanging out, and yeah, nothing happens good after, well, 2 o'clock back then, 12 o'clock now for me now. But going back to the anxiety and the shakes and the sickness, I remember that I would wake up and literally have all of it. Like, I'd feel nauseous, I'd feel sick. So what would I do? Drink, and you're so right about how we would go and celebrate. We would drink. If we're sad at a funeral, we would drink. If we're like, hey, guess what? I just got a promotion. Let's drink. Hey, after work, let's drink, like everything involved drinking. And I'm noticing the shift now. I don't know, maybe it's just my awareness, or maybe it's the people that I associate with. People are like, hey, after work, let's go to yoga. Or after work, let's go ahead and hike. Like, they
That's,
want to start doing things that are more productive. Do you notice that as well?
oh my gosh, yes, yeah, absolutely.
And even like the retreat that you were at in Bali, like amazing. Like, I always suggest, like, people are like, what do I do? How do I find my sober tribe? One of them is going to a retreat that's like alcohol free. And yes, I mean, your bar is amazing because it offers mocktails. Like, there's not too many places that has a nice mocktail list there. Can I have to like look it up online and then ask the bartender or whoever, hey, can you create this, by the way, for me? And there's so many fun things you can do with these drinks, and they actually taste really good. And then
Yeah,
if you're worried about the sugar, you could just burn it off by dancing if you want to. You still have fun.
exactly.
And there's just so much to life than feeling sick all the time, trust me. And for me, it was more of a dependency, but you're right, a lot people will be healthy all week and then like, all right, at the end of the week, I'm gonna go celebrate. Let's go to the bar, let's go drink night, let's go out to this club. And then it's like everything they work for, then, like you said, the brain cells, and then the
Mhm.
sickness, the cortisol, for women especially, and because our hormones are crazy. At least mine are crazy. They're
Amen to that.
up and down all the time. Oh my goodness. But more talking about like the whole anxiety aspect. Like, many people understand, of course, the physical consequences of alcohol dependency, but can you actually elaborate on the psychological aspects, especially relating to anxiety and mental health?
Yeah, I mean, and back to that cortisol. So think about it. Even if you're drinking on just like a Sunday, right? It's like you're not even getting back to just like your baseline until Wednesday, and then you're kicking it in again on Friday, right? So you're just like stuck in this like anxiety cycle. And this isn't maybe directly related to anxiety, but it's a point I always like to make, and I think you've like subtly made it a few times, and it's really important. It's also who you spend your time with.
Mm.
Right. And so when we're talking about mental health, right, I have a podcast called Becoming Unstoppable, and I do workshops. And something that I talk a lot about is just, how can we cultivate confidence? How can we ditch anxiety? How can we ditch shame? How can we ditch insecurity? And one of my main suggestions is like note who you're spending time with, right? Is it the person that's going to help you cultivate wellness, inspiration, right? Are you going and waking up and taking that hike where you're really getting to get out of your brain? Or are you doing something really damaging to your hormone levels, to your brain chemistry, and like superficial conversations? Like all of that, even though it doesn't feel directly correlated to our mental health, it really, really is, right? Our relationships matter to our life fulfillment. So all of these things together, right? I think, just again, that time suck of alcohol, it doesn't really build time to do the things that really help honor our confidence. And that's going to hurt our anxiety as well. And something that I really noticed back to those rules is when I was drinking, even, there's this thing called intermittent reinforcement. And all that means is like, imagine you're at a slot machine, right? Why do we keep going back to the slot machine? Well, most of the time we're going to lose, but occasionally we win. And for me, that was what those building those rules was like. So I would say to myself, like, okay, the weekend's coming up. I have a lot of work to do, or I want to go to the gym, or I want to see these friends and go hiking. But so I'm just going to drink on Friday, right? And I'm just going to have two. And then I would get to the bar and two would become four because that dopamine's hitting, and like you lose track. Your dopamine's kind of like overriding your brain where it's like, no, this is fun, keep doing it. And now on Saturday, I feel like trash, right? And I'm not getting it up and I'm not cultivating the things that are really good for my mental health. And what would start to happen is I would lose my trust with myself. So it was almost like I couldn't bank on the things I was saying to myself. So very subconsciously, it's taken a lot of like work to identify this. Now, I was not very aware of it in the moment, but I think as it related to my mental health, I was like, well, if I can't even manage just having two margaritas on Friday, how am I going to open my own business? How am I going to have boundaries with friends? Right. And it was just like I didn't like that bully in my brain that you were talking about, right? Like that like roommate that just lives there. That may have been an offline conversation. We have a similar pattern where we have that really like ruminating, overpowering bully in your brain that just tells you you're not good enough. It tells you you're not worthy. It tells you you're not meant for bigger things. And, I can't say that that's exactly like hand in hand with my alcohol, but what I can say is now that I do not drink alcohol, I don't notice that bully anymore, right? Like the confidence has absolutely been able to step in. The piece of myself that takes calculated risks and really invests in myself is definitely like I feel empowered. And it's, our mental health will dictate like what we think about ourselves will dictate what we do with ourselves. So if we're just spending all this time, energy, mental capacity on drinking, this cycle of drinking, on hurting our brain, on raising our cortisol levels, like how are we going to get to the spaces where it's finding clarity of what we want to do and taking the action steps to do it?
Right. Yes. Oh, and then you know what? Like I am my own best friend now. Like
Mm,
she's like my cheerleader. She's the one who roots for me. Keep going, Gina. Keep going. That roommate has been kicked out and she's been
yeah.
evicted.
Yeah.
She's out of there. And it's so true because even okay, I'll be honest, like sometimes it'll sneak up a little bit, she'll be knocking on the door, saying something like, oh, you don't look good today, or something. Shh, go away, and then it does happen. We're human beings, still. But just knowing the fact that we do have a spirit that is on our side and that we're so capable, we're so worthy of recovery, and we're so worth it. Like we are
Mhm.
so worth it. And then you were just mentioning how life is just transformed completely, since you eliminated alcohol. And I couldn't agree anymore. Like there are so many things that I thought I would never have done that I'm doing, and I'm just like, who's this? Who's this? You know, who's this girl? Reminds me of an old Madonna song back. I don't know how old you are.
Yes,
I'm like 42. Like, who's that
I'm
girl?
also
Oh,
42.
okay. Oh, we're same age. See, I was thinking that you were younger. But the song Madonna, who's that
Oh
girl?
yeah.
That's like, okay, yeah, who is this girl? Like seriously, where'd she come from, and how much, how better can it get? And it does get better. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. Now, for those who are actually considering reducing or even eliminating alcohol from their lives, what initial steps would you actually go ahead and recommend for them to begin this transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can only speak from my personal experience, but where I started, which is where I kind of tell everybody to start in any kind of like building their mental health, building their confidence, is finding community, right? So, I'm sure there are people that can just do this and like white knuckle it alone. I'm not that person. And so I started really like very subtly. I just started reading quit lit books. And for people that don't know, it just quit lit is simply like books on quitting alcohol, right? And I started listening to podcasts, right? So one of the first things that I listened to was a podcast. I don't even think it's on anymore because my stepdaughter randomly became their editor. I don't think she worked for them anymore. But there was a podcast that it was called Seltzer Squad. And they were just two bartenders in New York City that talked about what it was like to overcome alcohol. And just hearing other people speak about something I was going through was a huge first step for me because, and I think that this happens with mental health. Like social media can get us in trouble sometimes for sure. But what I love about social media is it does normalize experience, right? And there is power when it's like, oh my God, I'm not alone. Someone else feels that way. And I think up until I started listening to podcasts, I didn't know that other people had such a difficult time with alcohol, right? I had such a coined archetype for someone who's struggling, right? Like they lost their job, they might be homeless, they're going to AA. Like that's what I thought about it. And that's now I know there's a whole spectrum of people who are working on their relationship with alcohol or it's no longer serving them. And so to hear some people that resonate, like I resonated with the thoughts they were having, just totally changed. Like it gave me permission to be like, oh, I can rework this. I'm now seeing other people who have experienced what I've experienced and gotten to the other side. And then I started using social media. So, I have a professional Instagram account, but if my handle is a note from your therapist, and if you just see who I follow, it's like 90%, coaches, alcohol-free coaches, and people that are on, not that aren't in the necessarily professional industry, but that are going through their own struggles themselves, journeys themselves. And that also was really inspirational to me, right? To just see other people celebrate their wins, be vulnerable about how difficult it's been. Um, so that's, I always think, a good place to start. And just, you know, part of my whole message of becoming unstoppable is listening to your own intuition. And I think what I personally believe about this sobriety journey is it's very individual and that there's no one single way to get there. So, it's really listening to yourself and like, is this helpful or hurtful for me? And if it's helpful, do more. And if it's hurtful, do less. So for me, like building new patterns with non-alcoholic beverages was really helpful. I wasn't ready to like quit going to the barbecues yet, but if I brought my own seltzer water or I brought my own non-alcoholic beer, that helped me. That's not for everybody, right? Some people that's super triggering and that doesn't work, but it's just leaning into what works for you and keep going for it.
Absolutely. And how are your relationships now, like with your husband, with your stepchildren, friends, family? Let's talk a little bit about that because a lot of our guests have relationship problems. This is what they
Yeah.
tell me anyway.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to weaning off alcohol, because their friends are hating on them. Well, I tell them, well, first off, they're not really your friends. If they're hating on you, they should be rooting for you and supporting you because I have tons of friends who still drink, but
Hmm.
still are so supportive of me not drinking, you know?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And those are my friends.
Yes.
And I'm not going to judge them because they drink. No, this is their journey. This is my journey. Everybody's journey is different. I'm just so happy that I still have a friend, you know?
Yeah.
And, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your relationships now versus before.
Yeah, it sounds cheesy when I'm about to start with this, but and I'm going to echo you a bit. I think you have to start with that like relationship with yourself. And when you actually start to build confidence in yourself, your relationships do start to change. But I think something we don't talk about enough when it comes to particularly leaving alcohol behind is it does come with a mourning process, right? And a lot of the things I talk about is to make room for the things that are working for us. We have to let go of the things that aren't. And sometimes that means people.
Mhm.
And, for me, I really had, I think part of the reason it took so long for me to kind of like fully embrace my sobriety is I really had to drop into my body and think like, when I'm in the company of X person, what am I feeling? Especially what am I feeling now when I'm sober? And the truth was some of my relationships felt, the thing that bonded us was the drinking
Mhm.
and the culture of the bar and when I let go of the booze or like tried, either meet them at a bar and drink non-alcoholic drinks and or try to get them to do something else and they were resistant to it. Even when I was sitting with them at the bars, not drinking myself, I found the relationships to be more superficial, more gossipy, less inspiring. Um, and I had to let them go ultimately. So, through this journey, I have definitely lost friends, right? And I think, part of my therapy practice is I do what's called dialectical behavioral therapy. And it's just a fancy way to say that multiple things can be true at the same time. So it can both be true that I know that these people aren't right for me at this juncture of my life for what I need today. Maybe they were perfect for me 10 years ago, but this version of myself is doing something different now and has to make adjustments. And also, I can be sad about that. I mean, anybody who's gone through a breakup and been like the breaker upper probably has had some, some feelings of, I know this is good for me, but also sad, right? Um, so I did have to lose several relationships, but the ones that remained have been nothing but amazing. And I just got like so touched. I went to a party that my friend was having recently and I showed up and they were like, "Hey Al, we have a whole refrigerator full of like seltzer waters and mocktails that we bought you and not we didn't know what you wanted. So there's like a whole refrigerator over there." And I just thought like, thanks for knowing me. Like, thank you for making me feel as included. Thank you for making like doing something special for me. And what was awesome about it is I would say there was maybe 20 people there and five of them ended up being like, what, I'll try that. You know what, I got to drive tonight or I have a work meeting. So actually I could even see the influence of the decision I was making when people are like open to it. So yeah, you can still have drinking friends, but I think if they're telling you to drink, right, and not honoring your opinion, like your need, that's a red flag. Right. And it does show up. I did have people that were like, come on, you can just have one. You don't even have a real problem. You're not fun anymore. And like those are not the people for me. Those are not my peeps, right? Um, but particularly with my husband, he also quit drinking. He's on a year break, and whether he comes back and decides to have a cocktail or not, I let that, I empower him to make his own decision. But our relationship has done nothing but get stronger. And, we luckily as a couple weren't the couple that was like constantly drunk and fighting. But I was saying to him even recently, maybe we got into like 3 drunken fights per year. Right. But it's like each one of those take a toll, right? Like we're saying things we don't mean. we're behaving in a way that we wouldn't otherwise behave. We're yelling at each other. And now, do we fight? Yeah, of course, right?
Yeah.
But we can actually fight fair, right? We can like use our big words. But beyond even like, it's not even what we have what is no longer happening, like fighting. It's just we do things that we never would have done while drinking. And an example I always give is on that same Bali trip, my husband met me afterwards, and he wasn't sober at that time, but he was sober for the week. Like he agreed to not drink during our vacation. And we woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning to hike a volcano and watch the sunrise. And at the top, while we were drinking our coffee and like watching this magnificent sunrise, he was like, we never would have done this if we were drinking margaritas last night. And it's like, no, we wouldn't have. And we're having this like magical moment that we're both going to remember for life that was so bonding and special. And I think a huge takeaway of like my sober journey has been just like, you can only have so much fun when you're wasted. Right. And listen, I was out. Like I did all the things. I was at the clubs and at the fancy parties in New York City. But it's only so fun when you're drunk. But when you're sober, like how present you feel, how connected you can feel, how mindful you can feel, it like the power of it can be overwhelming. And I just don't think you can get to those touch points when saturated in booze.
It's so true. And it's so beautiful that you took that time with your husband and you're able to just be out there in the morning time and just experience like each other, nature, and just be present, like you said. It is an amazing feeling. Like I can't, words cannot even describe it. Like I become speechless when I talk about what you experience when you're so like when sober minded, you're
Yeah.
just like, or alcohol-free life, whatever you want to say it, however you want to say it. Because I know
Yeah.
some of the people I've worked with, they're like, oh, I don't like to use the word sober. No problem. Hey, you're living an
Yeah,
alcohol-free life.
exactly.
I get it. For me, it's like sober because it was like do or die. But everybody's journey is different, like we were discussing. But how amazing, like, okay, so a little bit about myself. So I was married previously to a DJ husband, and our lifestyle was partying 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I felt like anyway, because I was, drinking constantly. And we would be the ones we didn't get, we wouldn't, I wouldn't, I wish we would get into only 3 fights, a year or so. We got into like fights every week, and the physical cops involved everything. I was physical, like I was the abuser, at some points too. It is not pretty. And even just, I realized like, man, even like being intimate with this individual here. I don't think I ever had a sober moment where I was soberly connecting with this person. I don't even know who this person is. I don't even know who I am. It's like it wasn't a real marriage. Obviously, it didn't work, but now that I have been sober, here I was not even thinking I was going to find anybody. I was like, oh, please, Lord, I do not want any man. Please let me just date my spirit. That's it. I want to know myself. I want to date myself. Sure enough, though, that I guess the universe had different plans for me because sure enough, a man comes into my life, doesn't drink, maybe had like one sip of wine before and that's it. And we had so much in common. We shared, we talked, we do so much. And like, what a freaking difference. And I'm so in love. I'm like, this is Gina really in love with somebody and getting it reciprocated and sober minded. And then just the love that we have with our family and just the connection. It is a day and night difference between non-sober relationship versus a sober relationship. Wow.
Yeah.
Like again, I'm speechless. Like it's amazing the connection that you can actually, I didn't know I can love that like that. Let's
Yeah.
just say that.
Yeah. And you mentioned something that's, I think, really important too. So, I have three specialties in therapy, which is anxiety, trauma, but then I also do sex and intimacy. And, a huge issue that people face when they're getting sober is so much fear around like, what will their sex life look like? What will their intimate life look like sober, right? Because so many people haven't had those moments sober. And what I will always encourage is like, look, anything that we're doing for the first time is scary, especially when we're talking about intimacy. By nature of intimacy, you are vulnerable, right? You are like literally naked. But what is the point of connection and intimacy, right? It's like all of those like subtle moments, right? Someone's sounds, someone's touch, like you can't be that mindful. Again, you're disconnected. Like the act of being drunk, just in your brain, the way that your brain is operating, like your motor skills are turning off, right? Like you're not sensitive to touch. You're not attuned to someone's emotions. You're not attuned to your own emotions. So, it's like, I promise, sober sex can be weird at the beginning, but it actually gets very good. And so if you're listening and you like have that fear, like know that that's a normal fear, right? So many people who are getting sober experience that. But, just like all the other things that we're talking about, it gets so much better on the other side.
It totally does. I mean, my goodness, it just, yeah, yeah, it does. I was gonna go ahead and ask you about what significant changes have you actually observed in individuals? I'm not sure if you actually have any clients that talk to you about the topic of alcohol or not. But individuals who have moved to an alcohol-free lifestyle, let's just say,
Yeah.
and particularly regarding like their anxiety levels. How is
Yeah.
what yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So, when I do therapy and coaching, I do not specifically do alcohol free. With that said, so many of my clients do follow me on social media. So, and my social media is specifically professional, right? So, yes, I share pictures of my dog because he's delightful. But it's mostly like my story, mental health, things like that. So I think anybody who works for me is not, or works with me, is no stranger to sort of my pitch. So they'll often ask things about that. And now I have been so one of my specialties is anxiety, right? I have been very, very vocal about at least reducing alcohol, or at least evaluating your relationship with alcohol is a fundamental part of your mental health journey, right? They go hand in hand. Like the idea that we have this like, physical health and mental health is bananas, right? Our mind body connection is very, very powerful. And if we again are in that cycle of constantly disrupting things with alcohol, it's going to affect everything. It's going to affect our motivation, it's affecting our confidence, it's affecting our cortisol levels, it's affecting our relationships. Even if you're not fighting with your partners, again, you're not maybe having like meaningful conversations. So at this point, you will almost not be able to work with me without hearing the speech of like, yeah, of course you're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and feeling like garbage and really worried about what you did, because that's just what's happening. There's no way to override that. And I think because my approach to therapy at large, but really about anything, is non-judgmental, I'm going to give you the information and it's up to you. Like full empowerment is deciding what works for you. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm certainly not going to add shame to your pile. But what I have noticed in clients is when we can actually have the conversations, they do start to reflect, right? So like I've certainly had clients before that's like, I mean, if I'm getting real with myself, like especially, the whole like mommy wine culture, right, can be
Yeah.
really, really damaging. So I, work with a lot of business ladies, but I also work with a lot of moms, and I work with people who do both, right? They're working moms. And so we talk about, well, what is, you know, if you're coming home from work and you're like ready to make dinner and you're feeling really stressed, yeah, you have the coping skill of wine, right? Because we've all learned like mommy needs wine, or, hey, let's unrelax, let's take a bath and pour a glass of Tempranillo. But what would it feel like if you started to learn more coping skills? So when you work with me, I at least am going to talk about like, all right, fine, alcohol's in the coping skills to relax, to celebrate all the things we've talked about. But what else gives you that pleasure? What else gives you that decompression? What else gives you that alone time? And it's true that a lot of people don't know that those answers, right? They've just like thought once or twice, about the two or three things that work for them, and haven't had the time to really develop this like whole coping skills. So I have never yet seen anybody reduce or give up alcohol and tell me that their life is worse, right? I have only exclusively seen like you know what? I do feel better when I wake up clear-headed. I do actually have more, my kid is less frustrating to me when I'm not 3 glasses of wine in, right? Like them asking me to play more Legos. So, everyone has to get there on their own, right? That's the point of insight, is reflecting on yourself. But I think if each and every person actually asks themselves, how is this showing up in my life? And if you answer to me like, honestly, I don't have a problem. There's no issue whatsoever. My relationships are fine. I do have healthy coping skills. And like, hey, I'm not going to change your mind about it. But I think most people, if they actually give themselves the space to be true and honest, it is few and far between that someone has a healthy relationship with alcohol, or it isn't showing up in some negative way.
That's
Uh,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Actually, yeah, thanks for sharing that. Because a lot of listeners always are curious, to know what, our guest speakers offer and how they can get in touch. And speaking about getting in touch with you, where can they actually listen to your podcast? And let's talk a little bit about your podcast. So, is it a newer podcast, or have you had this one for a while?
Yeah, it's my baby. It's my passion project.
Oh, I love that.
I've been wanting to do it for a while. So we're at the ends of our first season. It's on all the places you find your podcast. It's called Becoming Unstoppable. But similar to what you do, right? It's pretty geared towards women. Men, feel free to take note. Welcome to listen. But I at this point in my career work primarily with women. I actually used to work specifically with men. And I find that women have really specific, like a lot of them feel like they're failing. A lot of them feel like they're not doing enough. A lot of them like don't necessarily have the greatest support systems, right? There's a lot of abuse and trauma that women endure. So it's just, I have guests that come on and talk about how we move through that and can really like tap into our own energy and let go of shame. Shame is such a powerful thing that I think so many women feel for so many reasons, their bodies, their sexuality, their needs. Um, so yeah, it's been a fun project so far.
That's awesome. I love
Yeah,
that. Yeah, I love sharing all podcasts. I just love resources. Whatever
yeah,
can help
yeah,
anybody,
totally.
please. I just bring it on
Yeah.
the show. I love sharing, share, share, share. And where can our guests go ahead and follow you on social media? What is your website? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so I'm on most handles. I think probably Instagram is my most, it's where I live the most. And my handle is a note from your therapist, and my website's under the same name, which is www.anotefromyourtherapist.com.
Perfect. And I'll have everything in the show notes. But lastly, how do you maintain your alcohol-free lifestyle in social settings or environments where alcohol is prevalent? And what advice would you actually go ahead and give to our listeners facing similar situations?
I have found that someone gave me this advice, and I'm going to share it with you. They said that every time you do something for the first time, just expect it's going to be super hard. So the first sober wedding, the first sober funeral, unfortunately, right? The first sober insert whatever here, you don't have a new pattern for it yet. But you're going to go there and like go in with your tools. And when you come out, everyone subsequent to that's going to be easier. So my personal tools have been have a plan, right? So I always have an exit plan. Like I drive myself. So if I want to leave, I can get out of there or take an Uber, but I don't rely on other people, because if it gets overwhelming for me, totally give myself an excuse to just peace out. I did avoid some of the bars at the beginning, and more of the social circumstances that I knew would really be triggering for me. Now, a few years in, I have much more support. At the beginning, if I was going to a party, I would bring my own non-alcohol, right? Like, I don't even care if it was just like, the AHA seltzer waters. So just something I had in my hand that I wouldn't be tempted. Um, and surrounding yourself by support, right? The other advice I got was, if all else fails, lie, right? You can say, I'm on antibiotics. I'm training for a marathon, right? Like, whatever it is, if you don't feel comfortable sharing your story, you don't have to, right? Like, just day at a time, get through whatever it is, and just keep focusing and recalibrating. And if you have a hiccup, right, if you swear to God you're not going to drink and then find yourself you do, just take a pause, take a beat, reflect. What did I need more of? what happens. Like no one shames themselves to clarity. Um, and my final note would be I kept a running dialogue on my app, on my notes app, of every time I drank or I didn't drink. So it was very, very helpful for me to read in my own words, like, you know, 4/15, 2022, set out to only have 2 margaritas, ended up having 6, felt like trash, right? May 15th, didn't drink, had a great time, danced anyway, got home safe, great night of sleep. And that was helpful to me to just kind of reflect on my own experience
Yeah, that
and
is,
see what was working.
yeah, that is wonderful advice. Like a drinking diary, kind of, you know?
Yeah,
I like that. I
exactly.
love that. Why didn't I do that? What the heck? I should have done something like that because I love writing, you know. I would just write about all the drama that was going on in my life. I should have kept a log of my drinking as well. Oh, actually, that wouldn't have lasted too long, that book. It would have already been filled. It was horrible. It was horrible. I'm so blessed and so grateful that I don't have that life anymore. And I'm so grateful that you're able to share and help our listeners just have an understanding about what alcohol does to the brain
Yeah.
and how, it can be so much better on the other side if you just take those baby steps. So I really appreciate you and what you brought onto the show today. Is there any last words or thoughts you'd like to share?
No, yeah, my final note is just like, hey, listen, if you're hearing this and you're curious, stay curious, right? Again, we don't have to guilt ourselves, we don't have to shame ourselves, but just asking yourself beautiful questions of like, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's you have the answers. So just keep going and find support. Find support. Listen to our podcast. Listen to this podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Keep
podcasts
going.
really do help. Seriously, I love I listen to podcasts all the time. Like I get inspired, you know.
Yeah,
Sometimes I
exactly.
listen to my own podcast because I have wonderful guests like yourself, and I'm just like having to listen to the message again. I'm like, yes, because I'm still learning too. Every day I'm learning, you know. It's never will end, you know. We're always learning something. Thank you so much, Allison, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.